Great. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see a great crowd joining us today for the final hurdle in Matthew John's MCM journey, his capstone defense. So I'm serving today as the chair of the defense, and we have Dr. Alex Sevigny with us, his supervisor, and Dr. Terry Flynn, second reader. So welcome to everyone in the audience, friends, family, members of the MCM community. So as chair, I'm going to review our proceedings, and after that, I will hand it over to Matt for his presentation. So the capstone defense is 25 minutes, so we will keep an eye on the clock as we are getting started. After the presentation is complete, we'll move over to the Q&A period. In terms of our sequence, Alex as supervisor will have the first opportunity to ask questions, then Terry as second reader, then myself. Depending on timing, we will then open the floor up to the audience if anybody has any questions they would like to pose. When we're all completed with question period, we will send everybody to a breakout room, so keep an eye for that prompt, except for Alex, Terry, and myself. And then we will have our conversation to complete our assessment of Matt's defense. And when we are done that, we will invite everybody back in from the breakout room. We will then announce the results of the defense. So that is the stage for today. So Matt, over to you to get rolling at 3:01.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew John, and today I will be presenting the results from my capstone research study entitled Exploring the Value of Corporate Socio-Political Activism. This afternoon, I will take you through the results of my study, beginning with an abstract and a background for the study. Then we'll look at my research questions, hypotheses, followed by methods, literature review, analysis, some conclusions, limitations and knowledge mobilizations, acknowledgements, and then questions. To begin, this paper explores the concept of corporate socio-political activism and its impact on organizational value. By analyzing literature and conducting in-depth interviews with senior management and a content analysis of more than 1,000 press releases and over 200 corporate reports, this study aims to understand how organizations create value through strategic CSA. The results indicate that CSA can influence consumer behavior, employee satisfaction, corporate financial performance, and organizational reputation, and more. But before we begin in earnest, I want to clarify the term corporate socio-political activism, or CSA, because there are a number of slightly different definitions to the term. Public relations scholars Dodd and Supa use the term corporate social advocacy, or CSA, to refer to an organization making a public statement or taking a public stance on socio-political issues. Marketing scholars Bhagwat et al. Opt for the term corporate socio-political activism, while also using the CSA acronym. Bhagwat defines corporate socio-political activism as a firm's public demonstration, statements, or actions of support or in opposition to one side of a partisan socio-political issue. So the core differences here between corporate social advocacy and corporate socio-political activism are the firm's specific actions in support of a position taken on a controversial or divisive socio-political issue. For the purposes of my research, I've chosen to use the more holistic definition by Bhagwat, which is inclusive of both advocacy and activism. Now, my study focuses primarily on value creation because I felt that a study highlighting the risks and reasons why organizations may eschew CSA would be rather easy, and the findings probably pretty apparent. There are ample examples of CSA gone awry. Delta Airlines publicly cutting ties with the gun lobby in the United States, which cost that organization a tax break in the state of Georgia. Bud Light last summer ran a campaign with a transgendered influencer on TikTok, which raised backlash from its core constituency. Bud Light's lack of action and a clear principled stance proved costly. The organization lost billions of dollars and its place atop the best-selling beers list in the United States, a financial hole that exists to this day. But if the risks of speaking publicly on hot-button issues are so fraught with division and enterprise risk, why are more organizations engaging in this type of work? A primary driver has been growing calls from the public and stakeholders for organizations not only to weigh in on issues, but to use their influence and resources to help solve society's wicked problems. Research questions and hypotheses. So this study seeks to better understand the reasons organizations undertake this work, its links to corporate strategy, specifically non-market strategy, and how organizations measure value, and if there are any industry-specific approaches that can be gleaned from this research. Now, I began the study with 3 hypotheses. The first, CSA generates significant value for organizations, justifying it as a practice. The second, CSA generates more non-market value than market value. And finally, the primary motivation for engaging in CSA is improved financial outcomes. And my 4 research questions. The first, why and for what purpose do organizations engage in CSA as part of their corporate strategy? Number 2, how and to what extent is CSA integrated into non-market strategy? Number 3, what measures do organizations employ to determine the value of participating in socially controversial discourse or activism? And number 4, how and to what extent do companies in different industries approach CSA, and what industry-specific factors are considered in their strategies? Now, over to my methodology. So this study consisted of 8 in-depth interviews with senior public relations, indigenous relations, government relations, and sustainability professionals from the private sector in North America. Thematic analysis was applied to the qualitative data collected from interviews, clustering responses into potential themes, reflecting on the validity of those themes, and refining as necessary. The analysis also involved using ChatGPT data analysts to perform a correlation analysis to each question set related to each research question. This study also used content analysis of press releases and publications from 25 North American publicly traded or publicly held organizations from 2020 to 2022. 15 were based in Canada and 10 in the United States, which yielded a data set of over 1,200 pieces of content. Each press release was hand-coded and into consolidated issues based on their headlines. I then used ChatGPT data analysts to perform latent derelict allocation, or LDA, which is a model for topic generation and analysis on the processed text from the press releases, and summarized into 5 themes: health and wellness, environmental sustainability, mental health initiatives, community support programs, and corporate responsibility. These 5 themes were similar in nature to the topics that I had generated through my own hand coding. To validate these findings, I took a random sample of 10% of the press releases. Content was then reviewed across the 5 topics with a binary true or false, indicating the presence of a keyword for each topic in the press release. And the accuracy of this coding was over 90%. Findings from my literature review. So the first is that stakeholder perceptions of CSA are important, if not critical, to the success of CSA activities. A 2020 study found that action-oriented messaging about climate change positively influenced and enhanced credibility, corporate reputation, positive word of mouth, and was better received than advocacy-only framed messaging or CSR-only framed messaging. A mitigating factor in this study was the organization's perceived motivation for the activism. So while subjects were more receptive to values-based messaging than purely market-based messaging, the study acknowledged that these binary positions are unlikely to exist in the real world, and therefore the acceptability of the messaging was primarily influenced by the consistency and authenticity of the advocacy. Another finding from the literature review that I found a bit counterintuitive that was, despite acknowledging that CSA practices create or invite risks for organizations, for some key stakeholders, CSA actually reduced the risk profile for organizations over those that did not practice CSA. Another study showed that investors responded favorably to organizations that expressed strong activism because they viewed the strength of response from influenced stakeholders would outweigh that of any negative response. And the final theme that I will discuss from the literature review is a common theme that emerged not only in the literature, but also throughout my research activities. And that is risk management and its intersection with non-market strategy. Now, as it's understood, non-market strategy primarily refers to the management of an organization's socio-political environment and the external forces that can affect a firm's performance. The activities that organizations use to manage these environments include corporate political activities, so lobbying, campaign donations, memberships, partnerships, as well as corporate social responsibility activities, community investment, reporting, donations, ethical supply chains, and the like. Empirical research has found that impacts from corporate political activity alone on a firm's financial performance was limited, and in some cases negative, particularly in organizations with low reputations. While business scholars have found a positive relationship between corporate financial performance and CSR. Now, in the past, CPA and CSR work have been kept separate. However, in recent years, there's been a growing integration of these functions as the recognition of the benefits is realized. The most pronounced benefit in my mind is the reduction of reputational risk created by dissonance between a firm's discrete activities, so the lobbying and campaign donations, and its public-facing commitments. And so we can clearly see a need to better integrate the practice of CSA into non-market strategy, as it's an effective tool to both enhance financial performance and manage non-market risks. Into my research question. So research question 1, why and for what purpose do organizations engage in corporate social advocacy or activism as part of their corporate strategy? The interview data from research question 1 highlighted 5 distinct themes. The first, alignment with values and identity. This revealed that organizations participate in CSA to highlight their commitment to addressing societal concerns. This was particularly prominent with respect to environmental sustainability, DEI and B, as well as mental health and wellness. The second theme was alignment with strategic business imperatives. The interviewees highlighted competitive or commercial advantages, as well as the ability to influence regulatory processes and outcomes as areas of strategic alignment. For instance, Canadian organizations that build infrastructure have done considerable advocacy surrounding economic reconciliation, particularly around loan guarantees for Indigenous nations. In turn, those nations are able to invest that capital for ownership stakes in infrastructure projects, thereby reducing regulatory and legal friction. The third theme was stakeholder influence and value creation. Now, in the B2B space, organizations cited being a trusted partner and counselor to governments and policymakers. However, with consumer-facing industries, the focus was really on the benefits a strong CSA position can have on employees, which drives internal productivity, employee retention, and increases overall job satisfaction. The fourth theme and the most commonly held position across the interviewee group was enterprise risk management. A correlation analysis of the interview text of the question set related to research question 1 showed a strong correlation between the terms risk and management. One interviewee described legislation as an existential threat to their organization, and successful advocacy was the most pressing strategic priority in their organization. Another interviewee stated that it would just be bad governance and bad risk management for them to not participate in the public policy landscape, given how much legislation and regulatory affairs affect their business. The final theme was ethical and social considerations. So this sentiment reflected the idea that large corporations have a role to play in addressing societal problems. And this is evident in the strong focus on highlighting mental health programs, environmental sustainability programs, and in Canada, Indigenous reconciliation programs. Research question 2, how and to what extent is CSA integrated into organizations' non-market strategy? Well, the integration is primarily evidenced through structured programs. These initiatives are aligned with long-term goals and corporate values. And in the pie chart on the right, shows the distribution of where the respondents said their efforts were placed. So 40% of respondents mentioned that CSA efforts are primarily channeled through DEI initiatives and reporting. These programs are designed to create a more inclusive work environment as well as address social inequities. 35% of respondents highlighted sustainability efforts as a key area where CSA is integrated. This includes environmental activism, sustainable sourcing, and reducing carbon footprints. The final quarter of respondents cited active participation in community development, so community engagement, supporting local causes as ways to integrate CSA into their strategies. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the content analysis also showed a focus on structured programs and initiatives in the press releases and corporate reports, primarily ESG, DEI, and mental health initiatives, demonstrating that CSA activities are embedded into corporate strategy and robustly reported on via press release and corporate reporting materials. When asked about barriers to integrating CSA into strategy in their organizations, respondents highlighted resource constraints, alignment with corporate strategy, aligning business interests with stakeholder expectations, as well as navigating complex stakeholder dynamics and perceptions. Research question 3. What measures do organizations employ to determine the value of participating in CSA? On the right, you'll see that ESG and sustainability reporting are by far the most common forms of external reporting, accounting for 55% of all corporate reports, followed by social impact here at 9%, just over 9%, human rights reporting at just over 8%, and DEI reporting at just under 8%. Corporate advocacy primarily focused on efforts to shape socio-political policies, particularly on climate and indigenous issues, where DEI initiatives were discussed as beneficial for organizational diversity, representation, and employee satisfaction. Organizations primarily use engagement metrics, reputation audits, stakeholder feedback, and sustainability goals to measure their socio-political advocacy. However, when prompted to provide examples of tangible value creation, interviewees highlighted increased customer engagement, revenue growth, competitive advantage in securing projects. So the analysis reveals that organizations use a variety of metrics to measure the impact of their socio-political activism, and that reporting on social performance is extensive, with a focus on compelling metrics like environmental performance, DEI statistics, and sustainability goals. So tangible value creation from CSA includes both direct benefits to the organization as well as positive societal impacts. Research question 4. How and to what extent do companies in different industries approach CSA, and what industry-specific factors are considered in their strategies? So first, most publicly traded and privately held organizations examined for this study recognize the strategic importance of integrating sustainability and advocacy efforts into their core business strategies. Sustainability is no longer seen as a peripheral concern, but rather as intrinsic to long-term value creation. However, where the CSA function lands within organizations is not standard. Interviewees were asked to give advice for organizations considering engaging in CSA, and they highlighted the importance of aligning actions with long-term value creation, maintaining open dialogue with stakeholders, and adopting a strategic approach grounded in business objectives. With respect to organizational approach, it depends on your industry and is predominantly determined by your stakeholder makeup and their influence. However, high-profile events, typically those intertwined with political or social justice narratives, can prompt organizations to speak or act. B2C organizations are far more exposed to these hot-button issues than B2B organizations are. I also asked interviewees what skill sets and competencies an ideal practitioner of CSA would have. They noted strong communication skills, strategic thinking, business acumen, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder and community engagement as competencies that would enable an individual to navigate complex advocacy landscapes and drive meaningful change. So very core public relations skills. However, in multiple occasions, leaders identified that their communications teams were not best equipped to advise on CSA. Now on to conclusions. So back to my hypotheses. H1 was CSA generates significant value for organizations, justifying it as a practice. The research supports this hypothesis and demonstrates that CSA can indeed create significant value for organizations. The findings indicate that strategic CSA enhances corporate reputation, fosters stakeholder trust, and drives both market and non-market value. Examples such as increased customer engagement and revenue growth substantiate the claim that CSA justifies itself as a practice by providing tangible benefits to organizations. Hypothesis 2, CSA generates more non-market value than market value. This hypothesis was partially supported. While CSA does generate substantial non-market value through enhanced reputation, stakeholder trust, and risk mitigation, it also has notable market value impacts. The study's findings suggest that CSA's market value, such as increased sales, customer loyalty, is significant for B2C companies. However, in B2B organizations, particularly in the energy, transportation, and utility sectors, this value is realized through enhanced competitive positioning for projects. Hypothesis 3, the primary motivation for engaging in CSA is improved financial outcomes. This hypothesis was also partially supported. While the financial outcomes are a significant motivator for engaging in CSA, the research reveals that ethical considerations, stakeholder expectations, and alignment with corporate values are also crucial drivers. Companies are motivated by a combination of financial benefits as well as a desire to address social issues, suggesting a more complex motivation landscape than purely financial outcomes. So what are the implications for public relations as a practice? Well, my findings have shown that there's a risk for public relations to be excluded from CSA strategy development. Non-PR leaders did not see a logical fit for practitioners, as their roles in the organization were viewed as tactical and focused on short-term outcomes. Supporting this assertion, during the process of identifying leaders for interviews, I was routinely routed to non-PR practitioners for interview candidates. So the critical question becomes, is public relations as a function appropriately positioned to lead or support the development of CSA strategy? Practitioners are going to experience encroachment issues or outright exclusion from the development of CSA strategy. Despite the fact that CSA is a natural extension of existing community investment programs, corporate social responsibility activities, as well as GR and ESG reporting. Not to mention, the execution of CSA strategy requires significant involvement from core public relations activities. This includes media relations, brand, stakeholder engagement, and reputation management, as well as measurement and evaluation. So the issues here are not managing or identifying stakeholder risks on the front end of strategy development, or developing the procedural agility in order to take advantage of CSA opportunities. Limitations and knowledge mobilizations. The first limitation was interview size. I wasn't able to track down as many professionals as I'd hoped. A larger sample size or a sample size from a specific sector, I think, would have yielded some interesting results. I also think that doing this study at regular intervals, 3 to 5 years, would be interesting given how the practice continues to evolve. The second limitation is this was primarily a qualitative study. I think more quantitative data would balance it out and perhaps yield a more repeatable study. For knowledge mobilization, I plan to present this study at local and Western Canadian IABC and CPRS conferences. I've already been asked to present at a few organizations in Calgary. I intend to submit for IPR Orlando and, if appropriate, publication for relevant journals, IPR or the Journal of Professional Communications. And that brings me to some acknowledgements. First, I'd like to thank my wife, Laura, my son, Pierce, my father, Jonathan, for their support and encouragement over these last 3 years. It's meant the world to me, and I couldn't have made it with them without them by my side. I want to thank Dr. Alex Sevigny, my supervisor, for his guidance, support, and encouragement, for helping me get unstuck and get this over the finish line. And thank you to Mark and Terry for agreeing to chair and evaluate my defense. And finally, to my classmates for their motivation and inspiration over these last few years. It's truly been amazing. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well done, Matt. Right on time. Very interesting and well presented. But the first to share their thoughts will be your supervisor. So over to Dr. Sevigny.
Well, everybody knows that I'm interested in methods, and so my first question is around methods. So you mentioned the smaller interview sample size, and maybe you could just kind of tell the story of how that happened.
Yeah, so it was not for lack of effort. It was difficult to get people to speak to me about this topic. I had a lot of non-responses, a lot of ghosting. I relied a lot on Snowball, methodology to help me connect me with other leaders, which was helpful. I connected with Terry, connected with you, other people in the program, and it was just very challenging. So it came to a point where I was very confident in the rest of my analysis and the rest of the data set that I had, particularly the literature review and the content analysis. And so in order to get a product finished, I was happy with the quality of the interviews that I had as well. So I was confident to move forward.
Great, thank you for that. I was there along with you. You were out there making inquiries for weeks and weeks.
Yeah. It was even months. It was really months. I was doing interviews, like hitting the street. It was very challenging. And I wanted to get a diverse set of folks across various industries. And so, most of my contacts primarily concentrated in the energy industry. I didn't want to sort of overload my study with just energy industry professionals. So that was another challenge.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to read it, and it was a pleasure to work with you on this project, I have to tell you. And one of the reasons that it was such a pleasure is that we got to try something new, and that was using ChatGPT analysis, data analysts, to do the LDA. And so maybe you can kind of walk us through how you did that and how you did your reliability testing.
Sure. So I did hand code, 1,000 press releases, and I was coding them for one particular topic, whereas the LDA analysis looks for a set of keywords across the 5 topics, and it will validate whether do these keywords appear in this topic or not. And so what I asked ChatGPT to do was rather simple, in that I provided it the code book and the keywords and the process text, and then asked to validate whether those keywords were present. And so it just said, in those 5 columns, true or false. You could go into that particular set of keywords, review it, check if it was there. And where the inaccuracies actually occurred was around the confusion between health and wellness and mental health initiatives. Some were coded as only health and wellness, where they were mental health focused. So you have to do a little bit of digging there within the keywords and the appropriate context. But the success rate was quite good, and I believe it was because the simplicity of the task I asked for ChatGPT to run there.
Yeah, I mean, if we're running an interquarter reliability, 0.91 is pretty strong. Actually, it's very, very strong. So great. I won't take up any more time. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Flynn.
Just to follow up on that, given the fact that it is new and not necessarily an accepted form of validity testing, because it's so new, I haven't seen anything else published where you have ChatGPT interquarter reliability stats. Do you think it might have also been a good idea to, in your own human coding, to have had a different coder as well do the interquarter reliability?
it would have added an additional layer of reliability. However, I was confident in what the program was able to do, given that the task was fairly repeatable, and I think even with the instruction set, that a human coder would have been able to do it just as effective. It probably would have taken them much longer in order to be successful at it, but yes, for sure.
Okay. Can you talk to me about table 9? Because I don't think you spend a lot of time talking about table 9, which is your correlation matrix.
Sure.
And maybe you can bring it up as a way of being able to describe to everybody else. And just give me a narrative behind the table 9.
Sure. All right. Did everybody see the table 9 here?
Maybe can you just expand it a bit more? Just
sure.
Even further, yeah.
Sure. So let me go back, because I have my notes just above table 9, if you don't mind me. So if everybody's okay. Yeah. So here, this is showing the correlations between the topics. So which of these topics were strong? Which of these topics were more strongly correlated with one another? So particular programs that their keywords are more closely linked. So environmental sustainability was more closely correlated with corporate responsibility keywords, as well as corporate community support programs were more closely correlated with corporate responsibility programming as well. So the health and wellness and mental health initiatives were the most closely correlated in terms of how.
Yeah, what I like about it most is just the presentation of it. So because usually these tables are just data and pretty boring. So this is like a heat map, right? You're showing in some respects a heat map. So I think that's a good way of visualizing some data, right? To be able to show that we're looking for perfect correlations at 1 and those correlations that are not in that red heat map area. So that's good. Thanks for that. Did you notice any? So you had in your interviews, you had 4 from Canada and 4 from the United States.
Yep.
Did you notice any difference between responses from those that were operating in the United States or a US based company versus a Canadian based company?
Not particularly. I think I will say that 2 of the folks from the US, that actually 3 of the folks that I interviewed from the US were comms professionals. And one was a CCO who was very much engaged at the C-suite level. One was a senior leader who did not. So I would say the differences here were their integration with their corporate strategy departments and their ongoing conversations, so to speak, with how their organizations responded to events. So there was a lot of discussion around being reactive to events. So George Floyd, Ukraine, LGBTQ plus issues that were prompted by events, and so they were very much reactive in a way that the organizations in Canada seem to be much more comfortable speaking to a more programmatic approach to the way that their CSA activities were organized and aligned to their corporate strategy and their business objectives.
So if I interpret that, you're saying that American professionals in this field are more aligned to corporate strategy than Canadian professionals in this field.
No, the opposite. So I
Oh.
found the American folks gave me a lot more reactive examples, and two of them were less confident speaking to the like the strategic outcomes of this type of work. And so in Canada, I primarily, I was primarily engaged with, and I'll say that one of the Americans that I did interview, their organization operates both in Canada and the US. And so they were able to be more eloquent with their the way that they discussed their connection and their linkages to corporate strategy with respect to advocacy work and activism work.
Okay. And just my last question in this round. So if corporate leaders don't think that communicators are the right profession to drive this, who do they think should be driving it?
So, well, it depends who you talk to, because they all think they're the right people. So, so I spoke with this one sustainability professional, in the conversation that I had with them. She actually said that the comms team is just putting out fires every day and they have no long-term view. She said that we operate in a 3 to 5 year landscape view, and our comms teams are looking at day to day. And it's difficult for them to be viewed as credible when they're only working in the day-to-day firefighting, and everything's a fire and everything matters. And she actually said that they were kind of like the little boy who cried wolf. And so she felt like while the job that they did was important, that they just didn't have the business acumen nor the view, the long-term view required to advise on strategy.
That's it for now. Thanks.
A GR person felt the same way. The GR folks said, the comms team they're the storytellers. And so when you're busy telling stories, you don't have, and he said that his team was more empowered to go out and do advocacy work, and do that because there was value in what they did, and that the comms team was just there to tell stories, basically.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. So Matt, a couple comments and 2 questions. First, well-written paper. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very lucid and clear. And I think that I'm glad you did your work on this topic. I think it is a prominent topic and it's understudied, right? It's quite new. So I think it's novel and useful and interesting that you've provided this research and insight. Just as a quick anecdote, our firm did a consulting project related to this lately, large client, and they reached out, focused on the responsive, not their proactive part. So to say, if something happens, there's a big issue publicly and everybody's seen to talk about it, give us guidance on how and when and to what audiences do we respond to it, from a CSA perspective, although that term wasn't commonly used.
Yeah.
So it certainly is a hot topic. So my questions, I actually want to build on what you just talked about with communicators. So I think we reacted a little bit, maybe, we don't see the audience, maybe they did too, because it would intuit that the communicators are so well positioned to lead on this file. And, how do you, as an MCM, student, soon to be alum, look at this and say, what should we do as a profession if we're being overlooked for something that should so obviously be in our domain, So not being perceived as strategic enough to lead in something which is communications related.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it is a challenging program, and or a challenging problem. It's similar to that problem that PR practitioners faced with encroachment from marketing professionals, and I think what PR leaders need to absolutely be focused on is what are the corporate strategic drivers, and having business acumen that is acknowledged at the leadership level. When your teams are viewed as they don't understand the business, they're just the pen, it's a credibility issue. And so as a leader, as a public relations leader, you need to bring your teams up to snuff with respect to business acumen and understanding how organizations are making money, the policy and regulatory and legislative issues that affect your organization, and how the core public relations activities can enhance the performance of your corporate political activities, your CSR activities. Because what we're seeing here is the research has shown that lobbying and campaign donations and just political activities in a vacuum is not super successful. But when you combine CPA, political activities, with CSR, there's value there. It's showing positive corporate financial performance results. And there's two parts, and where I view the CSA component is at the top of the triangle, right? It's like a three-headed piece there, where everything that you're doing from lobbying to your CSR to the public positions that you're taking are aligned, and they're logical, and there's no dissonance created within your audiences. And where public relations really fits in is being able to provide strategic insights and intelligence into a stakeholder group that may view your position as BS or unbelievable. So being able to drive consistent advocacy positions, providing intelligence on your key stakeholders and how they're going to react to particular positions, and how are we going to manage the risks when we are advocating for one thing at amongst government officials, but our public position is this. Is there dissonance here, and does this create reputational risk? So I think for PR practitioners, it's how does our function provide additional value in terms of execution of CSA, and also the risk management piece. So how do we manage the risks that CSA activities inherently bring to an organization?
Well stated. I had a dual agenda in asking that question. One was related to this topic, and the other one was this broader theme about the MCM program, right? As we send out our grads out into the world, what are their perspectives at operating at a leadership and a strategic level? So appreciate the response there. Last quick question from my side. It's about authenticity. You had the opportunity to do in-person interviews, to review a lot of things. I'll just make an analogy, CSA, well, we used to talk about CSR, corporate social responsibility, and there was a perspective that this was often something that organizations didn't inherently necessarily want to do, but they were expected to do it. They were pressured to do it, be good corporate citizens. And then we have terms more recently like greenwashing, or the implication that we're saying we're doing things, we're presenting ourselves as doing things, we're maybe overstating the case, and further to that, we're pressured to do it. So I noted in your paper, you said companies until relatively recently weren't doing this. They saw it as, why bother with the risk? Now there's a social and stakeholder expectation that they do it. What is your take on this being a sustainable, continuing part of what companies do, and the degree to which corporate actors are doing it as something they're intrinsically motivated by versus a financial motivation, which is something that you touched on in your third topic?
Yeah, I think that, and this came up in my interviews as well, around being a good corporate citizen is just good business, and that, so for instance, an individual that I interviewed in the transportation sector was like, fuel costs are one of our biggest organizational costs. If we can reduce the amount of fuel we burn, we not only reduce our carbon footprint, but we're saving money. So this is clearly a good strategic opportunity for our business. Our investors will respond well to this because we're controlling and reducing costs, increasing margins, and they're able to credibly present reduction in carbon emissions. So there are various sort of examples around why being a good corporate citizen is good business, and it increases your returns, it increases your, it enhances your corporate reputation, and enables and makes your company more resilient in terms of being able to manage a crisis. So I think there are a whole slew of benefits to positive CSR activities combined with credible and authentic CSA advocacy and activism work that work in concert to bolster financial performance, as well as smooth out regulatory issues or reduce legal frictions and other like non-market factors that influence your business.
Excellent. I appreciate the perspective. It's not always, people are not always so lucid in being able to overlap those things to a win-win. So thank you for that. I will turn over Dr. Savani if any final questions from your end.
I'm happy to pass my questions either to Terry or to the. I know we have a big audience. They probably want to ask a question or two.
So just tell me about how you're going to roll this out. The IPR conference and Orlando are two different conferences. Just IPR Bridge is in Washington. The IPRRC
I meant
is in
Orlando.
So
I meant
okay.
Orlando, but yeah, hey, yeah, if I will,
it's all good. It's all good. So why do you think your paper would be accepted at those kind of conferences?
Well, it's certainly timely, and like throughout the process of this, well, number one, I'll say more seriously, it's timely. There are issues that organizations, private and publicly held organizations, are going to be wrestling with, for the rest of time. I think the social environment has changed, to which the stakeholder expectations are, we are expecting X, we are expecting Y, and if you look at programs that have already been instituted for years now, ESG, DEI programs, you're now seeing counter activism attacking organizations that have these positions, and they're being caught flat-footed because A, they don't have authentic positions, they have positions that they just feel that they need to have, and they are not they're not aligned with like who the business is. So there are, a couple examples. I think most recently, like Tractor Supply and John Deere were, forced by online activists to rescind some of their DEI policies where they're putting their social donations. Really embarrassing for organizations. So I think, research like this will help organizations think about the way they need to structure these programs, the questions that they need to be asking, and the pitfalls. Like, why are corporations failing, but how are corporations succeeding? So I think the focus on value creation is actually novel in that everybody likes to see the car crashes and everybody likes to pontificate over that. Whereas here this focus is on what are organizations doing to create value and have these programs, these social programs, drive meaningful change and address social issues.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Taking a look at our clock here, I think we have time for one excellent question from our audience. If anybody wants to jump in, you can come on camera or not if you want to ask a question. All right, well, with no questions forthcoming, I think we will call to a close of our Q&A period. Terry will send everybody to a
Yeah.
breakout.
I just want to also acknowledge before we go, because some people have already dropped off. As we started, we had 4 members of the incoming MCM 18 class who were interested. So obviously the topic, and I see there's still one that is here, Christina Stroud from Syngenta. So congratulations, Matt. You obviously have a topic that's of the important issue to people. Okay, so
Yeah,
the
thank you.
rooms are open. We'll close it when we've done.